The moment, Hannah Thornton felt the first sharp contraction tear through her abdomen. She knew with absolute certainty that the baby was coming, and there was no one within 10 miles to help her. She gripped the wooden counter in the ranch kitchen, her knuckles white against the worn pine, and forced herself to breathe through the pain that radiated from her lower back around to her swollen belly. The summer of 1878 had been brutal in Idaho territory, and today the heat seemed to press down on the small ranch house like a physical weight, making the air thick and hard to draw into her lungs. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 3 months now, killed when his horse spooked during a routine cattle drive and threw him against the rocks near the Snake River. And Hannah had been managing the ranch alone ever since, determined to prove she could handle everything until the baby came. She had been wrong about the timing. The midwife in Lewiston had told her she had at least 2 more weeks, maybe 3, before the baby would arrive. Hannah had planned everything so carefully, arranging for her neighbor Clara Whitmore to come stay with her when the time drew near, making sure all the supplies were ready, preparing herself mentally for what was to come. But babies, she was learning far too late, did not follow anyone's schedule but their own. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time, and Hannah gasped aloud in the empty house. When it passed, she wiped the sweat from her forehead with a trembling hand and tried to think clearly through the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The nearest ranch was the Grayson property, 6 miles to the east. Old Walter Grayson and his wife kept mostly to themselves, but they would help if they knew she needed it. The problem was getting word to them. Hannah had no horse saddled, no way to ride even if she could manage to mount in her condition, and the pain was coming faster now, telling her that this baby was not going to wait. She moved slowly toward the window, each step an effort, and looked out across the dusty yard toward the barn. The cattle were grazing peacefully in the near pasture, undisturbed by her distress. The chickens pecked at the ground near the fence. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, while her entire world was narrowing down to the reality that she was about to give birth completely alone. Then she saw the rider coming up the long drive from the main road, and hope flared in her chest like a struck match. Hannah squinted against the bright afternoon sun, trying to make out who it was. The horse was moving at an easy lope, the rider sitting relaxed in the saddle, clearly not expecting any emergency. As they drew closer, Hannah recognized the tall, lean figure of Wade Garrett, one of the cowboys who had worked for Thomas before his death. Wade had moved on to find work at a bigger spread near Lewiston after the funeral, understanding without being told that Hannah could not afford to keep hired help anymore. He had been kind to her during those awful first days, handling the funeral arrangements and making sure the ranch was secure before he left, but she had not seen him in over a month. Hannah stumbled to the door and pushed it open, calling out as loudly as she could manage. "Wade! Wade, help!" Her voice sounded weak even to her own ears, and for a terrible moment she thought he had not heard her. But then she saw him sit up straighter in the saddle, his head turning sharply toward the house, and a second later he was spurring his horse into a gallop that sent dust flying up from the dry ground. Hannah sagged against the doorframe, relief washing over her so powerfully that her legs nearly gave out. She was not alone anymore. Someone was here. Wade reached the house in seconds and was off his horse before the animal had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. He was 25 years old, 3 years younger than Hannah, with dark hair that needed cutting and the kind of weathered face that came from spending every day under the brutal sun. His blue eyes, which she had always thought kind, were wide with alarm as he took in her appearance, one hand braced against the doorframe, her dress soaked with sweat, her face drawn with pain. "Hannah, what is it? What is wrong?" Wade bounded up the porch steps 2 at a time, reaching for her elbow to steady her as another contraction began to build. Hannah could not answer immediately, could only focus on breathing through the pain, and Wade went pale as understanding dawned. "The baby. Oh God, the baby is coming now." "My water broke about 20 minutes ago," Hannah managed when she could speak again. "The contractions started right after. Wade, I cannot do this alone. I need help. I need the midwife from Lewiston." Wade's jaw clenched, his mind clearly racing through the same calculations Hannah had already made. Lewiston was 30 miles away over rough terrain. Even riding hard, it would take hours to get there and back. He looked at Hannah's face, saw the fear there mixed with the pain, and made his decision in an instant. "Come on, let me get you inside properly and settled. Then I am riding for town as fast as that horse will carry me." "Wade, it is 30 miles. You will kill your horse." Hannah let him guide her back into the house, grateful for his strong arm supporting her weight. "Then I will run the last mile on foot if I have to," Wade said grimly. "But I am bringing that midwife back here, Hannah. I promise you that." He helped her to the bedroom, where the bed was already made up with clean sheets in preparation for the birth. Hannah sank down onto the mattress with a groan, and Wade quickly moved around the room, his cowboy's efficiency serving him well as he gathered everything he thought she might need and placed it within easy reach. Water pitcher and basin. Clean towels. The knife she had sterilized for cutting the cord. He had helped with enough difficult calvings to know the basics, even if human birth was far outside his experience. "There is a spare horse in the barn," Hannah said, gripping his wrist as he turned to go. Her eyes were desperate. "Saddled or not, bring him up to the house before you leave. If something goes wrong, if you do not make it back in time, I need to know there is a way to try to get to town myself." Wade covered her hand with his own, his calloused palm warm and steady. "I will make it back in time. But I will bring the horse up anyway, just so you feel easier." He hesitated, then added, "You are the strongest woman I know, Hannah Thornton. If anyone can do this, you can. Just hold on until I get back with help." Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Wade was gone, his boots echoing through the house as he ran. She heard him in the kitchen, the sound of the pump as he filled a canteen. Then the screen door banged and his footsteps crossed the porch. Hannah closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She had to stay calm. Panic would only make everything worse. Women had been giving birth since the beginning of time, often in conditions far worse than this. She could survive a few hours alone. She had to. Through the window, she heard Wade's voice, firm and reassuring, speaking to the horses. A few minutes later, there was the sound of hoofbeats approaching the house, and she knew he had brought the spare mount as promised. Then the hoofbeats changed, becoming faster, more urgent, and she knew Wade was gone, riding hard for Lewiston and the help she so desperately needed. Hannah pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the tight swell of another contraction beginning, and whispered a prayer that he would make it in time. Wade leaned low over his horse's neck, urging every bit of speed from the animal beneath him. The gelding was a good horse, steady and strong, and Wade had always taken care to never push him too hard. But today was different. Today, a woman's life and the life of her unborn child depended on how fast he could cover 30 miles of Idaho Territory terrain. The road to Lewiston was well-traveled but rough, cutting through dry grassland and rocky hills, and Wade knew every mile of it. He had ridden this route countless times in the past 2 years, but never with such desperate urgency driving him forward. The sun beat down mercilessly, and within the first mile Wade could feel sweat soaking through his shirt. He ignored it, ignored everything except the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the need to keep moving. His mind kept flashing back to Hannah's face, pale and frightened in the doorway of the ranch house. She had been so strong after Thomas died, refusing offers of help from well-meaning neighbors, determined to prove she could manage on her own. Wade had admired that strength even as he worried about her, alone on that ranch with no one to turn to if something went wrong. He had been on his way to check on her today, actually, though he had not planned to admit that to anyone. Wade had been thinking about Hannah Thornton far too much in the weeks since he left the ranch, and he had finally given in to the urge to ride out and make sure she was doing all right. He had told himself it was just concern for a friend, just making sure the widow of his former boss was managing, but he knew it was more than that. It had been more than that for a while now, though he had never acted on it, never said a word. Thomas had been a good man and a fair employer, and Wade would never have disrespected him by pursuing his wife. And after Thomas died, the idea of approaching Hannah with anything like romantic interest had seemed impossibly inappropriate. She was grieving, pregnant, trying to hold her life together. The last thing she needed was some cowboy declaring feelings she probably did not return. But Wade could not stop himself from caring about her, could not stop himself from worrying, and so he had saddled his horse this morning and ridden out under the pretense of just passing through the area. Finding her in labor and desperate for help had been a shock, but at least he had been there. At least she was not facing this completely alone. Wade dug his heels into his horse's flanks, pushing for more speed. He had to get to Lewiston. He had to bring back help. Failure was not an option he could allow himself to consider. The miles passed in a blur of dust and heat. Wade's horse began to tire after the first 10 miles, its breathing growing labored, foam flecking its neck. Wade spoke to the animal constantly, encouraging words mixed with apologies for pushing so hard. At 15 miles, he stopped at a creek to let the horse drink, forcing himself to take 5 minutes even though every instinct screamed at him to keep moving. A dead horse would help no one, and he still had half the journey ahead of him. While the animal drank, Wade splashed water on his own face and refilled his canteen, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Just a bit more, boy," Wade said, running a hand down the horse's sweat-darkened neck. "We are going to make it. We have to make it." The horse tossed its head as if in agreement, and Wade swung back into the saddle, turning toward Lewiston once more. The town was still 15 miles away, but the road improved from here, becoming wider and more level as it approached the settlement. Wade urged the horse into a steady lope, the fastest pace he dared maintain for the distance remaining. His thoughts turned to what he would find when he returned to the ranch. Would Hannah be all right? Would the baby have come already? Wade knew almost nothing about childbirth beyond what he had observed with cattle, and he was painfully aware that human women faced dangers animals did not. He had heard stories of women who bled to death, babies who came out wrong, terrible complications that could kill both mother and child. The thought of Hannah facing any of that alone made his chest tighten with fear. She was so brave, so stubborn in her determination to handle everything herself, but some things were simply too big for one person to manage alone. Wade had fallen in love with her slowly, so gradually that he had not even realized it was happening until it was far too late to stop. At first, she had just been the boss's wife, a pretty woman with a quick smile who always made sure the hired hands had good food and fair treatment. But over the months of working at the ranch, Wade had come to see her strength, her intelligence, the way she could gentle a spooked horse or calculate accounts with equal skill. She treated everyone with respect, from the lowest ranch hand to the wealthiest rancher in the territory, and she never complained even when things were difficult. Thomas had been a lucky man, Wade had often thought, to have won a woman like Hannah. After Thomas's death, Wade had seen her grief, raw and painful, and his heart had ached for her. He had wanted so badly to comfort her, to tell her she did not have to face everything alone, but what right did he have? He was just a cowboy, a hired hand with nothing to his name except a horse and his saddle. Hannah owned property, had standing in the community, was carrying her late husband's child. She existed in a different world from his, and Wade had no business thinking otherwise. So he had left the ranch, found work elsewhere, and tried to convince himself that distance would cure what he felt. It had not worked. If anything, being away from Hannah had only made Wade more aware of how much he cared about her. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering if she was managing all right, if she needed anything, if she was lonely in that big house by herself. Other women in Lewiston had made it clear they would welcome his attention, but Wade had no interest in pursuing anyone else. His heart belonged to Hannah Thornton, hopeless as that situation might be, and he was apparently too much of a fool to move on. Well, being a fool had its advantages today, Wade thought grimly as Lewiston finally came into view on the horizon. If he had not been riding out to check on Hannah, she would have been completely alone when the baby started coming. Maybe fate had put him on that road at exactly the right time. Maybe there was a reason for everything, the way his mother had always claimed. Wade did not much believe in divine providence, but he was willing to be grateful for good timing regardless of its source. Lewiston was a growing town, bustling with activity, even in the afternoon heat. Wade rode straight down the main street, ignoring the startled looks from townspeople as his exhausted, foam-covered horse stumbled slightly. He pulled up in front of the doctor's office, knowing that the midwife, Mrs. Adelaide Porter, kept a room there for her supplies and could usually be found nearby. Wade was off his horse before it fully stopped, nearly falling in his haste, and burst through the door without bothering to knock. Dr. Henry Marshall looked up from his desk in surprise, his gray eyebrows rising at the sight of Wade's disheveled appearance. "Good Lord, son, what happened? You look like you rode through hell to get here." "I need Mrs. Porter," Wade gasped out, only now realizing how winded he was. "Hannah Thornton, the widow out at the Thornton ranch. Her baby is coming right now and she is all alone. I rode 30 miles to get here. Where is Mrs. Porter?" Dr. Marshall was already on his feet, his professional calm sliding into place. "Adelaide is at the hotel, having her lunch. I will send my assistant to fetch her immediately." He stuck his head out the door and shouted for his young assistant, who came running. The doctor gave rapid instructions, and the boy took off toward the hotel at a sprint. Marshall turned back to Wade. "How long ago did the labor start?" "Her water broke about 20 minutes before I arrived, so maybe an hour and a half ago now. Contractions were already coming strong and close together." Wade ran a shaking hand through his hair. "Doctor, I have to get back there. I promised her I would bring help." "And you will, but not on that horse," Marshall said firmly. "That animal is done for the day. You will kill it if you try to ride another 30 miles. I have a fresh team hitched to my buggy out back. Mrs. Porter and I will drive out to the ranch. It will take longer than riding, but we will make it." "I am coming with you," Wade said immediately. "I am not leaving her alone any longer than necessary." Marshall studied him for a moment, and something in the older man's eyes suggested he understood more than Wade had said aloud. "All right, son. Let us get ready. Adelaide will be here any minute and we will leave as soon as she arrives." True to his word, Mrs. Porter appeared less than 5 minutes later, a tall, imposing woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had delivered hundreds of babies over her career. She took one look at Wade's face and immediately began issuing orders. "Henry, get your bag." "Wade, go to the mercantile and tell them I need my standard delivery supplies. They will know what I mean. Meet us at the buggy behind the office. We leave in 10 minutes. Wade did not waste time with questions, just ran to the mercantile and gasped out Mrs. Porter's message. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Peters, moved with impressive speed, assembling a bundle of supplies and pressing it into Wade's arms. "Tell Mrs. Porter this is on credit. She can settle up later. And good luck, son. Mrs. Thornton is good people." By the time Wade made it back to the doctor's office, Marshall and Mrs. Porter were already in the buggy, a strong team of horses stamping impatiently in their harness. Wade climbed up beside them, clutching the bundle of supplies, and Marshall snapped the reins. The horses lunged forward and they were off, racing out of Lewiston at the fastest pace the buggy could safely manage. The journey back to the ranch was agonizing. The buggy was faster than a single rider over distance, the fresh horses making good time, but it still felt impossibly slow to Wade after his desperate ride into town. He kept glancing at the sun, watching it sink lower toward the western horizon, calculating how long Hannah had been alone. 3 hours now, maybe 4. How long did labor last? Could she manage that long by herself? Mrs. Porter seemed to read his thoughts. "First babies usually take their time," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "And Hannah is a strong, healthy woman. The odds are very good that everything will be fine." "Usually," Wade repeated, latching onto the word that left room for exceptions. "But not always." "Nothing in this life is guaranteed, young man," Mrs. Porter said. "But I have been delivering babies in Idaho territory for 25 years, and I am very good at my job. We will take care of her." Wade had to be content with that. He fell silent, his hands clenched into fists on his knees, and watched the familiar landscape pass by. Dr. Marshall drove with skill, choosing the smoothest paths, avoiding the worst ruts that could slow them down or damage the buggy. The man was at least 70, Wade guessed, but his hands on the reins were steady and sure. "How long have you known Mrs. Thornton?" Marshall asked after a while, his tone conversational despite the urgency of their mission. "About 2 years. I worked for her husband before he died." Wade paused, then added, "She is a good woman. She deserves better than to be going through this alone." "She has you," Mrs. Porter observed. "That seems to count for something." Wade did not know how to respond to that, so he said nothing. But as the miles passed and the sun continued its relentless descent toward the horizon, he found himself thinking about what Mrs. Porter had said. Hannah had him, for whatever that was worth. Wade had no money, no property, no real prospects beyond whatever ranch work he could find. But he had a strong back, willing hands, and a heart that apparently belonged to Hannah Thornton, whether she knew it or not. Maybe, after today, after she and the baby were safe, he could find a way to tell her that. Maybe she would even want to hear it, or maybe she would thank him kindly for his help and send him on his way, preferring to maintain her independence rather than tie herself to a poor cowboy. Wade honestly did not know which way it would go. But as the Thornton ranch finally came into view in the fading afternoon light, he pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, the only thing that mattered was making sure Hannah survived this day. Everything else could wait. Hannah heard the sound of the approaching buggy and nearly wept with relief. The past 4 hours had been the longest of her life, an endless blur of pain and fear, and desperate attempts to remember everything she had ever heard about childbirth. The contractions were coming constantly now, barely any rest between them, and she knew with a certainty born of instinct that the baby would be here soon whether help arrived or not. She had dragged herself to the window a dozen times in the past hour, looking for any sign of Wade's return, terrified that something had happened to him, that he had not made it to town, that she truly would have to face this alone. But now she heard voices, heard Wade's familiar drawl mixed with other voices she did not recognize, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. He had done it. He had ridden 30 miles and brought help back, just as he had promised. Hannah tried to call out, but another contraction seized her, and all she could do was grip the bedpost and try to breathe through the overwhelming pressure. The bedroom door flew open, and Mrs. Porter swept in like a force of nature, with Wade and Dr. Marshall close behind. The midwife took one look at Hannah and immediately began rolling up her sleeves. "Out," she said firmly to the two men. "Both of you. I will call if I need assistance, but this is no place for men right now." Wade looked like he wanted to argue, his face tight with concern as he stared at Hannah, but Dr. Marshall took his arm and steered him out of the room. "Come on, son. Let Adelaide do her work. We will just be in the way." Hannah barely registered their departure. Mrs. Porter was helping her back to the bed, her hands capable and gentle, her voice a steady stream of instructions and encouragement. "That is it, dear. You are doing wonderfully. Let me examine you and see how far along we are. I am going to wash my hands first. Always wash the hands. I do not care what the old wives say about it not mattering." Time became strange after that, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. Hannah was aware of Mrs. Porter's presence, of her firm guidance, of the cool cloth someone pressed to her forehead between contractions. The pain was enormous, overwhelming, beyond anything she had imagined, but there was something almost clean about it, purposeful. This pain had a reason, an end goal. She was bringing her child into the world, and that made it bearable. "I can see the head," Mrs. Porter said at some point, and Hannah heard the smile in her voice. "You are almost there, Hannah. A few more pushes and you will have your baby. You are doing beautifully." Hannah bore down with everything she had, feeling her body respond to imperatives older than language. She heard herself making sounds she had never made before, primal and raw, and did not care. There was no room for embarrassment or self-consciousness anymore. There was only the work, the essential task of bringing forth life. And then, after an eternity compressed into moments, there was a release. A sudden absence of pressure, and the sound of a baby crying filled the room. Hannah collapsed back against the pillows, gasping, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and relief. "You have a son," Mrs. Porter announced, and there was warmth in her usually stern voice. "A fine, healthy boy with excellent lungs. A son." Hannah started crying, great heaving sobs of joy and relief and grief all mixed together. Thomas had wanted a son so badly, and now she had given him one, but he was not here to see it. She reached out her arms, and Mrs. Porter placed the baby in them, a warm, squirming bundle wrapped in a clean towel. Hannah looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face and fell completely in love. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one, I am your mama." The baby stopped crying at the sound of her voice, his unfocused eyes seeming to look in her direction. Mrs. Porter worked efficiently around them, delivering the afterbirth, checking to make sure there were no complications, cleaning everything up with the brisk competence of long experience. "You did very well," she told Hannah. "Much better than many first-time mothers. Your son is healthy and strong, and you came through it without any tearing or excessive bleeding. You were lucky." "I was lucky Wade came when he did," Hannah said softly, unable to look away from her baby's face. "If he had not brought you." That young man rode 30 miles in record time and nearly killed his horse doing it, Mrs. Porter said. I have never seen anyone so determined. He must care about you a great deal. Hannah's heart did something complicated in her chest at those words, but she was too exhausted to examine the feeling closely. Mrs. Porter finished her work and gathered up the soiled linens. I am going to let the men know that mother and baby are both doing well. Then I will bring you something to eat. You need to keep your strength up, especially if you plan to nurse that boy yourself. After Mrs. Porter left, Hannah lay in the quiet room with her son in her arms and let herself simply feel. She was alive. Her baby was alive. They had made it through something that could have killed them both, and they had survived. She owed Wade Garrett a debt she could never fully repay. If he had not been riding past at exactly the right moment, if he had not dropped everything to race to Lewiston for help, the outcome might have been very different. Hannah kissed her son's forehead softly and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever power had put Wade on that road today. Outside the bedroom, Wade paced the length of the front room for the 100th time, too keyed up to sit despite his exhaustion. Dr. Marshall had tried to get him to rest, pointing out that Wade had just ridden over 60 miles in less than 6 hours, but Wade could not make himself relax. Not until he knew Hannah was safe. Not until he heard that the baby had been born healthy. Every sound from the bedroom made him tense, and the wait was agony. When Mrs. Porter finally emerged, wiping her hands on a towel, Wade nearly lunged at her. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right, Mrs.?" Porter smiled, which Wade took as a good sign. "Mother and baby are both doing beautifully. Hannah came through the delivery with no complications, and she has a healthy baby boy. You can go in and see them for a moment if you like, but do not stay too long. She needs rest." Wade did not wait for further permission. He crossed to the bedroom door and knocked softly before entering, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been when facing down the 30-mile ride or any of the other challenges of the day. Hannah was propped up on pillows, looking pale and exhausted but radiant with a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up with a smile so warm it made Wade's chest ache. "Wade," she said softly, "come meet my son." Wade approached the bed slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Hannah's arms. He had seen plenty of newborn calves and foals in his life, but somehow this was different, miraculous in a way he could not quite articulate. The baby was so small, so perfectly formed, with tiny fingers curled into fists and a shock of dark hair on his head. "He is beautiful," Wade said, his voice rough. "He looks like you. You want to hold him?" Hannah asked, and before Wade could protest that he had never held a baby in his life and was terrified of dropping it, she was lifting the bundle toward him. Wade took the baby carefully, supporting the head the way he had seen Hannah doing, and looked down at the small face. The baby's eyes were closed now, his breathing even and steady in sleep. "What will you name him?" Wade asked, unable to look away from the infant in his arms. Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I was going to name him Thomas after his father. But I think I want to give him his own name, not a ghost to live up to. I was thinking Daniel Thomas Thornton." "That is a good name," Wade said. "Strong." He reluctantly handed the baby back to Hannah, afraid he would do something wrong if he held him any longer. "Hannah, I am so glad you are both all right. When I saw you in the doorway earlier today, I have never been so scared in my life." "You saved us," Hannah said simply, her eyes meeting his. "If you had not come when you did, if you had not ridden for help, I do not know what would have happened." "Wade, I can never thank you enough for what you did today." Wade wanted to tell her that she did not need to thank him, that he would ride 1,000 miles if it meant keeping her safe, that his entire world had narrowed down to her well-being somewhere during that desperate race to Lewiston. but the words stuck in his throat, too large and too frightening to say aloud. Instead, he just shook his head. "I am just glad I was there. I was riding out to check on you anyway, make sure you were getting along all right. Looks like I had good timing." "Why were you checking on me?" Hannah asked, and there was something in her expression that made Wade's heart beat faster, a kind of gentle curiosity mixed with something that might have been hope. "Because Wade stopped, aware of Dr. Marshall and Mrs. Porter in the next room, of the baby in Hannah's arms. Of all the reasons this was not the right time. "Because you have been on my mind," he finished lamely. "I wanted to make sure you were managing." Hannah smiled, a soft, knowing smile that suggested she heard what he had not said. "Stay for supper," she said. "Mrs. Porter said I need to eat to keep my strength up, and I am sure she will make enough for everyone. You must be starving after the day you have had." Wade was starving, he realized, and completely exhausted, but the idea of leaving the ranch tonight, of riding back to Lewiston and not knowing how Hannah and the baby were doing, was unbearable. "If you are sure you do not mind," he said, "I would like that." Mrs. Porter and Dr. Marshall ended up staying the night as well, the midwife insisting that she wanted to monitor Hannah for at least 12 hours to make sure there were no delayed complications. Wade found himself conscripted into helping with the evening chores, feeding the animals and making sure everything was secure for the night. It felt good to move, to do something useful with his hands, to work off some of the nervous energy that still thrummed through his body. The physical exhaustion was catching up with him now, his legs shaky and his shoulders aching from hours in the saddle, but he pushed through it. When he came back inside, Mrs. Porter had cooked a simple but hearty meal from supplies in Hannah's kitchen, and they all ate together around the table in the front room. Wade was painfully aware of how domestic it all felt, how much it resembled the life he had always wanted, but never thought he could have. Hannah ate in bed, following the midwife's orders to stay off her feet for a day, but her door was open and Wade could hear her talking softly to the baby, singing a lullaby in a voice sweet enough to make his heart ache. Dr. Marshall left the next morning, needing to get back to his practice in Lewiston, but Mrs. Porter stayed another day to make sure Hannah was fully recovered. Wade stayed too, not because anyone asked him to, but because he simply could not make himself leave. He told himself he was just helping out, making sure the ranch work got done while Hannah recuperated, but he knew it was more than that. Being in Hannah's home, watching her with her son, seeing her smile when he brought her a cup of tea or handled some small task she needed done, it all felt too right to walk away from. On the afternoon of the second day, after Mrs. Porter had declared Hannah fit and packed up her things to return to town, Wade found himself alone with Hannah for the first time since the birth. The baby was sleeping in a cradle Thomas had made months ago, and Hannah was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, looking out at the ranch. Wade came in from the barn and found her there, backlit by the golden afternoon sun, and the words he had been holding back for months suddenly could not be contained any longer. "Hannah, I need to tell you something," he said, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "And you can tell me to leave if you want, and I will go and never bother you again. But I have to say this, or I am going to lose my mind." Hannah turned to look at him, her expression patient and encouraging. "What is it, Wade?" Wade took a deep breath and committed himself. "I am in love with you. I have been in love with you for longer than I can say, and I know I have no right to feel that way and no business telling you, but after yesterday, after nearly losing you, I cannot keep it to myself anymore. I know you probably do not feel the same way, and that is all right. I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." The silence that followed was the longest of Wade's life. Hannah stared at him, her eyes wide, and Wade braced himself for the gentle rejection he was sure was coming. But then, slowly, Hannah smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Wade Garrett, you are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish, and I have not decided which yet." "Probably foolish," Wade admitted, his voice rough. "Definitely foolish, actually." Hannah rose from the rocking chair, moving carefully, and crossed the room to stand in front of him. She was so close Wade could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "I do not think you are foolish," she said softly. "I think you are remarkable. You rode 30 miles to save my life. You dropped everything to help me when I needed it most. And now you are standing here telling me you love me, even though you are terrified I am going to reject you." "Are you going to reject me?" Wade asked, hardly daring to hope. "No," Hannah said, and reached up to cup his face in her hands. "Because I love you too, you stubborn, wonderful man. I have been falling in love with you since long before Thomas died, though I never let myself admit it until now. And I know it is too soon and people will talk, and there are 100 practical reasons we should wait. But I am done waiting, Wade. I am done being practical. Life is too short and too uncertain for that. I love you, and I want you in my life in whatever way you are willing to be here." Wade kissed her then, unable to help himself, and Hannah kissed him back with a fervor that took his breath away. It was not a gentle kiss or a tentative one. It was the kiss of two people who had come too close to tragedy, who understood how precious time was, who were done denying what they felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against Hannah's and tried to wrap his mind around the fact that she loved him, that he was allowed to love her back, that somehow, impossibly, this might actually work. "I do not have much to offer you," Wade said quietly. "Just what I can earn with my labor and my heart, which is entirely yours if you want it." "I want it," Hannah said firmly. "I want you, Wade, not your money or your prospects or anything else, just you." "Then you have me," Wade promised, "for as long as you will have me." The days that followed were both wonderful and challenging as they navigated their new relationship, while also managing the demands of the ranch and a newborn baby. Wade moved back into the small cabin that had housed ranch hands when Thomas was alive, and threw himself into the work of keeping the property running. Hannah was recovering well, regaining her strength quickly, and Daniel was a healthy, easy baby who seemed content as long as he was fed and held. The neighbors, when they found out about Hannah and Wade's relationship, reacted with varying degrees of acceptance. Some were happy for them, understanding that a widow with a newborn needed help and that Wade was a good man. Others gossiped and whispered about inappropriate haste and questioned whether the relationship had started before Thomas's death. Wade wanted to confront anyone who spoke ill of Hannah, but she stopped him with a hand on his arm and wisdom in her eyes. "Let them talk," she said calmly. "They will tire of it eventually, and we know the truth. That is all that matters." Wade was not sure he agreed, but he respected Hannah's wishes. She had lived in this community longer than he had and understood its rhythms better. If she said to let the gossip run its course, he would trust her judgment. Besides, they had more important things to focus on, like the upcoming harvest and making sure the ranch turned enough profit to survive another year. As summer faded into autumn, Wade and Hannah fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked side by side during the day, managing the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset while Daniel slept in his cradle nearby. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, dreams, fears. Wade told Hannah about his childhood in Missouri, about the father who drank too much, and the mother who had worked herself to death trying to hold the family together. Hannah told him about growing up in Ohio, about the flood that killed her parents when she was 16, about meeting Thomas at a church social, and agreeing to marry him partly out of love and partly out of desperation for security. "I cared for Thomas," Hannah said one evening, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "I truly did. He was a good man, and I mourned him when he died. But what I feel for you, Wade, it is different. Bigger somehow. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Wade said firmly, taking her hand in his. "It makes you honest, and I am grateful for it." As the months passed, and Daniel grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, smiling baby, the gossip about Hannah and Wade gradually died down. They were too obviously devoted to each other and too hardworking to make for interesting scandal for long. The ranch prospered under Wade's management, and Hannah's natural business sense meant they got fair prices for their cattle and supplies. They were building something together, a partnership that worked on every level. In December, as the first snow began to fall over Idaho territory, Wade asked Hannah to marry him properly. He did it without a ring, because he had spent his money on winter supplies for the ranch instead, but Hannah did not care. She said yes immediately, her eyes bright with tears of happiness, and they set a date for the following spring when the circuit judge would be passing through Lewiston. The winter was harsh that year, with deep snows and temperatures that dropped well below freezing. Wade and Hannah weathered it together, keeping the fires burning and the livestock fed, taking turns walking the floor with Daniel when he was fussy. It was hard work, but Wade had never been happier. He went to sleep each night in the small cabin, and woke each morning knowing that Hannah and Daniel were just across the yard, and that soon they would be a real family in the eyes of the law and the community. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and budding trees, and with it came their wedding day. They married in the small church in Lewiston, with half the town in attendance. Hannah wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Wade wore his best shirt, and the new vest Hannah had made him as a wedding gift. Daniel, now almost a year old and starting to take his first wobbly steps, served as an unwitting ring bearer by being passed between the two of them during the ceremony, making everyone laugh. After they were married, Wade moved into the main house with Hannah, and the small cabin became a storeroom. It was strange at first, sleeping in the same room where Thomas had slept, but Hannah had rearranged everything, making it theirs instead of hers. Wade found he did not mind the ghosts. Thomas had been a good man, and Wade could honor his memory while still building a life with the woman they had both loved. Life settled into a new normal. Wade and Hannah ran the ranch together, expanding the herd and improving the property year by year. Daniel grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who loved horses and followed Wade around like a shadow. The community fully accepted them now, and they had friends among the other ranching families. 2 years after their wedding, Hannah told Wade she was pregnant again, and his joy was so complete it frightened him. This time, they were prepared. The pregnancy was carefully monitored, and when Hannah went into labor on a warm summer evening, Mrs. Porter was already at the ranch, having come to stay the week before. The birth was easier than Daniel's had been, and Wade was allowed in the room this time, holding Hannah's hand and whispering encouragement while she brought their daughter into the world. They named her Sarah, and she had Hannah's hazel eyes and Wade's dark hair. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with everything, and Wade's heart felt so full he thought it might burst. This was his family, these 3 people who depended on him and loved him. He had never imagined he could have something so perfect. More years passed, good years marked by hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Wade earned a reputation as a fair man and a skilled rancher, and Hannah was known for her business acumen and kind heart. They had 2 more children, another boy they named James, and then finally another girl they called Elizabeth. And the house that had once seemed too big and too empty was filled with laughter and noise and love. Daniel grew up strong and capable, learning everything Wade could teach him about ranching and horses. Sarah was clever and quick-tempered, always organizing her siblings into elaborate games. James was the quiet one, thoughtful and gentle, while Elizabeth was fearless, climbing trees and riding horses almost before she could walk. Wade loved them all with a fierce protectiveness that sometimes scared him with its intensity. On a summer evening when Daniel was 15 and little Elizabeth was 5, the family gathered on the porch as they often did after supper. The older children were talking about the upcoming harvest, making plans for how to manage the work, while Elizabeth sat in Wade's lap, fighting sleep. Hannah sat beside him in the rocking chair, her hand resting on his knee, and Wade looked around at his family and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah asked softly, reading his expression the way she always could. "That day," Wade said quietly, "when I found you in labor and rode to Lewiston. Sometimes I still have nightmares about what could have happened if I had not been there." Hannah squeezed his hand. "But you were there. You saved us, Wade. You gave us this life." "We gave each other this life," Wade corrected, leaning over to kiss her temple. "I was just a cowboy with nothing to my name. You made me believe I could be more." "You were always more," Hannah said. "I just helped you see it." As the sun set over the Idaho Territory ranch that they had built together, Wade held his sleeping daughter and watched his other children laughing together, and felt Hannah's steady presence beside him. The ride to Lewiston 15 years ago had been the most important 30 miles of his life, the desperate race that had brought him not just to Hannah's side in her moment of greatest need, but to this future, this family, this love. Sometimes the universe put you exactly where you needed to be at exactly the right moment. Sometimes love came in the form of a cowboy happening down a road on a summer afternoon. Sometimes miracles looked like nothing more than good timing and a fast horse and the willingness to ride through hell to reach the person who mattered most. Wade had ridden 30 miles to save Hannah's life that day. But in the end, she had saved his too, giving him a purpose and a family and a love worth any sacrifice. They had built a good life together out of tragedy and desperate circumstance, proving that sometimes the strongest foundations were laid in the hardest moments. Years later, when Wade was an old man with silver in his hair, and Daniel running the ranch with his own children underfoot, people still talked about the day he rode 30 miles in record time to bring help to Hannah Thornton. The story had become legendary in the county, a tale of devotion and heroism that parents told their children. But Wade never thought of himself as a hero. He had just done what anyone would do for the person they loved. Hannah, lying beside him in bed at night with her hand in his, would disagree. "You are my hero," she would whisper in the darkness. "You always will be." And Wade, who had started life as a poor cowboy with nothing but his horse and his saddle, who had found love in the most unexpected circumstances and built a family through determination and grace, would hold her close and know that he was the luckiest man alive. The ride to Lewiston had taken only hours, but it had led to a lifetime of happiness, and that made every desperate mile worth riding. Their children grew and married and had children of their own, staying close to the ranch that had been their childhood home. The Thornton Garrett Ranch became a gathering place for family, a center of warmth and love that drew people in and made them want to stay. Wade and Hannah aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year, weathering the inevitable sorrows and challenges that life brought with the same partnership that had seen them through that first desperate day. When Wade was 72 and Hannah was 75, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Daniel, now a successful rancher himself, gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. "My father rode 30 miles to save my mother's life before I was even born," he said, raising his glass. "And then he spent the next 50 years proving that the ride was just the beginning." To Wade and Hannah Garrett, the finest parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. Wade looked at Hannah across the crowded room, saw her eyes bright with happy tears, and felt the same surge of love he had felt that day so long ago when he had burst through her door and seen her in desperate need. She was older now, her hair silver and her face lined with the marks of a life well lived, but to Wade she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Wade and Hannah sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The moon was full, casting silver light over the land they had worked and loved for so many years. Hannah leaned her head on Wade's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "You ever regret it?" Hannah asked softly. "Giving up your freedom to tie yourself to a widow with a baby?" Wade laughed quietly. "Not for a single second. You and Daniel and all our children, this ranch, this life, it is more than I ever dreamed I could have. How could I regret the best thing that ever happened to me?" "I love you, Wade Garrett," Hannah said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "I have loved you since the day you rode through hell to save me, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Hannah Garrett," Wade replied, using the name that still gave him a thrill of pride even after 50 years. "Forever." They sat together in the moonlight, two people who had found each other in the midst of crisis and built a love that lasted a lifetime. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to their hard work and devotion. Their family slept in houses nearby, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and cherished. Wade thought back to that terrified young cowboy who had ridden 30 desperate miles with a prayer on his lips and fear in his heart. He had not known then what the future would hold, had not dared to hope that Hannah might love him back, had only known that he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. That desperate ride had changed everything, setting in motion a love story that would span decades and touch countless lives. As he sat with Hannah in his arms, Wade sent a silent thank you to whatever power had put him on that road at exactly the right moment. He had ridden 30 miles to bring help, but he had found something far more precious than he had ever imagined. He had found home. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the Idaho Territory night was filled with the sounds of crickets and distant cattle. Wade closed his eyes and breathed in the scent of Hannah's hair, felt the steady beat of her heart against his chest, and knew that this moment, right here, right now, was perfect. All the struggles and sorrows and triumphs of their long life together had led to this peace, this contentment, this bone-deep knowledge that they had lived and loved well. Hannah sighed contentedly and murmured something about being tired, and Wade helped her to her feet with the gentle care of long practice. They walked inside together, hand in hand, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 50 years. As Wade lay beside Hannah in the darkness, listening to her breathing even out into sleep, he felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built. The ride to Lewiston was just the beginning. The real journey had been the years that followed, the daily choice to love and support and build together, the countless small moments that added up to a lifetime of happiness. Wade had ridden 30 miles to save Hannah's life, and in doing so, he had saved his own. They had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and they had created something beautiful and lasting. As Wade drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of that desperate summer day so long ago, and of the woman beside him who had made everything in his life make sense. He had been just a cowboy with nothing to his name, but Hannah had seen something more in him, had believed in him, had loved him. And that love had made all the difference. In the morning, they would wake up together as they had done for 50 years. They would drink coffee on the porch and watch the sun rise over their ranch. They would greet their children and grandchildren who would stop by throughout the day. They would work side by side on the small tasks that filled their days now that others handled the heavy labor. And they would love each other, steadily and deeply, the way they had always done. The story of the cowboy who rode 30 miles to save his love had become family legend, told and retold to each new generation. But for Wade and Hannah, it was not just a story. It was the foundation of their life together, the moment when everything changed, the beginning of the greatest adventure either of them had ever known. And as the years continued to pass and their love continued to grow deeper and richer, they never forgot that it all started with one desperate ride, one prayer answered, one moment when being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time made all the difference in the world. Wade had ridden 30 miles through dust and heat with fear driving him forward, and he had arrived just in time to help save the woman who would become his wife, the mother of his children, the love of his life. Everything good in his world had flowed from that day, and he would be grateful for it until his last breath. Their love story, born in crisis and fear, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of devotion and the miracles that could happen when two people chose to love each other through every challenge life brought. Wade Garrett had been just a cowboy, and Hannah Thornton had been just a widow, but together they had built an empire of love that would echo through generations. And so they lived, happily and contentedly, surrounded by family and secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other everything they had ever needed. The ranch prospered, their children thrived, and Wade and Hannah grew old together with grace and gratitude, never taking for granted the precious gift they had been given. When Wade finally passed away at the age of 85, with Hannah holding his hand and their children gathered around, his last words were of love for his family. Hannah followed him 6 months later, unable to bear being without her partner and soulmate. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside Lewiston, their headstone bearing a simple inscription, "Together forever." Their descendants continued to run the ranch for generations, and the story of how Wade rode 30 miles to save Hannah was passed down through the family, growing richer with each telling. It became a legend of true love and heroic devotion, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories began in the most desperate circumstances. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered on the porch of the old ranch house, they would look out over the land that Wade and Hannah had built together and remember the love that had made it all possible. The cowboy and the widow, brought together by crisis, bound together by love, creating a legacy that would last forever. Their love had started with a 30-mile ride and a prayer, and it had grown into something vast and enduring, a force that shaped lives and touched hearts for generations. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, rooted in courage and devotion, and built to last an eternity. The end came not with drama but with peace, the natural conclusion to a life well lived and a love well honored. and in the hearts of all who knew them and all who would come after, Wade and Hannah Garrett lived on, their story a beacon of hope and a testament to the transforming power of true love. The cowboy who rode 30 miles had found not just a woman to save, but a life to live, a family to cherish, and a love that truly lasted forever.